Mark, are you ready?
Yeah, yes. Are we all ready? Yeah, this is not a presentation. This is a discussion, and if we don't get enough discussion, then I'm going to be really controversial and throw out some real humdingers or whatever. So, but yeah, so this is a discussion. So I was looking for thinking of innovation is who I am in life, and in fact, after listening to all this, everybody talk about their stories, I wrote a book too about transitions, and life is about transitions. And I hear everybody talk. It's just wonderful, the transitions. If you hear just a elevator pitch, you think the person is only what they just said. And it's just wonderful what we just learned of everybody. I've known some of these people here for 10 years and didn't know some of this stuff about them. And each only took 5 minutes. But that's what this is about. I use the word Experidigm, and I can come to that. But the purpose of this discussion is for you as an individual and for the groups that you're associated with and the society that you belong to or the community or village that you belong to. Learning how to Experidigm and spread the joy of Experidigming is critical, I think, to success of being a human being and, yes, being closer to God, because I think God is all about experiencing life, and that's what we're here for in this human existence. So I'm going to talk about how it impacts work and society, but I'm going to throw out some really serious questions that'll get you thinking over these holidays about what joy is versus happiness. And I want to get happiness off the table because happiness is much more of a material, transitory thing. It's never in the scriptural literature or spiritual literature. It's joy is in the spiritual literature, and joy is usually talked about more on the spiritual side. So, but to do the different kind of discussion, Jim sent out 3 pages and it's only halfway filled in. So I was going to go through that because I've learned as I give presentation and talks to groups and things that for the group to remember something, it has to be kinesthetic or physical too. And so they need to write down a couple things that helps them remember what we're doing. And so I'm going to refer to the 3 pages, but I don't know, Jim, is there a way for you to put it up in your square or whatever? Or I'll keep talking, but yeah, because Jim sent it to everybody. But so, the 3 pages, and I'm going to look at it. And if you had it printed out, it would be easy to write on there. But we're going to take a journey about how to Experidigm in life. And so the first little point on my sheet says, an Experidigm is, and it's got a blank. So what is an Experidigm? An Experidigm is a change in experience. And that's what everybody was talking about here in their entire career, a change in experience. But we don't have any words to talk about that. And we rarely talk about our experiences with other people. We really do. Now, but, an experience is different than stagnation and addiction. And I got to come back to that because in our society today, we're pretty stagnated and addicted and not experiencing much. So the next line says, an Experidigm, a blank, creates and shares new activities in fellowship. New activities in fellowship are important. So who does that? Okay, so then and that second thing, an Experidimer. So that's the word that's missing, an Experidimer, one who experiences. One who experiences, creates, and shares. So they create their experience and they share it in fellowship. Then that word's in there twice. Fellowship, new activities, and it was supposed to be in experienship. And so instead of a word of fellowship, which is sort of sexist, experienship, which means you share experiences. So then the third one, and then I'm going to get to the controversial thing after this, is it basically says blank flows from doing Experidigms and not watching. And so what this basically says is joy flows from doing Experidigms and not watching. So this is pretty important. This is really where we're beginning to understand, or theoretically, what joy is. Because when I say as what joy is not watching. And so why do I say not watching? Because in a society that watches TV, in a society that watches PDAs, in a society that's watching theater and it's watching sports, it might not have the ability to experience and do things in life, activities, skills, building and walking and just doing. And we're going to come talk about what skills we've really lost. But why is watching so common in the world today? I think, yeah, just throw this out. Go into the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire, in every major city it had a theater, it had a Colosseum, and it had a bath. And why was this? I call it the work, watch, sleep cycle. That if you're a big organization and you want your people to follow you, you might want to take care of their whole day by watching. So you work them, then you have them watch what watch theater, watch the Coliseum. And so we've just taken that into the modern world, into a new era, the work, watch, sleep cycle. And so that work, watch, sleep cycle doesn't have anything to do with experidigming or experiencing life. And if you hear people say that they're too busy to go and do something else, wow, okay, so we got a problem. And we're going to talk about that problem later, just pointing out that there's a serious issue here with experiencing life. And if we go to the, we're all corporate people here talking about corporate, and in most of the corporate in the modern world from after World War II was about making products, okay, and selling those products, individual products. But then the corporate world has shifted in the last 15 years to experiences. Either you're selling an experience or you're actually taking somebody's experience, like Google and Facebook, and reselling it. And so what's happened to experiences? And we're going to go through this. But here's the good news. And this is what is not going to be controversial, but it's so simple. It can actually help lead an individual life, a group life, and maybe society to focus on experidigming, the freedom to experidigm. Why would we do that? Because in this next one, it says joy is, and this is the joy equation. Joy is the number of experidigms times the number of participants in your experidigm minus the number of T's, the letter T. The letter T stands for turd throwers, tyrants, and takers. And so this equation basically, that's for those that are not mathematical, the bottom line is the more experiences you have and the groups that you join with those experiences and the people that they have in those experiences, the higher the joy you're going to have. So you might be, in a corporate world, you might be in a corporate world and you got 5 friends in that corporate world. You might be in a church and you might have 5 friends in the church. That's 2 different experidigms. You might then, have a hobby, play sports, soccer, and you got 20 people on your team. As you add more of these things, you might have a hobby that you meet with every week and you meet with 10 people on those. You might have 5 hobbies where you meet with many more people. So all of a sudden you see that the number of experidigms is growing and the number of participants is growing. That last example may have had 10 experidigms, maybe 100 people. So 10 times 100 is 1,000, minus the number of turd throwers, takers, and tyrants in life, the negative people. Well, you might think that it might not rise higher than 1,000. Well, that might be true, but the average person doesn't have many experidigms, and they have very few other participants, real participants in their lives. And so this equation can become positive if you experidigm with other people, build fellowship with other people, and experidigm with them. If you don't, we're going to talk briefly about turd throwers, tyrants, and takers, and how social media shows us how pronounced they are. So later in this, I'll give examples of this equation in action, but I wanted to stop real quick. And this was not a presentation, so this equation is extremely important to understanding joy. I'm not philosophically going to say that if I live in my room and don't ever go out and experience life, am I going to have joy? I don't know. It's debatable. But to improve my joy and to keep having joy, I have to go do stuff. And the problem with doing stuff, and this is the problem with spirituality all the time, and evil, they say there's evil out there. I believe there's turd throwers, takers, and tyrants that are trying to prevent me from having joy. So I stop, and what do you think about that?
Mark, doesn't joy come from within?
Joy would come from both within and without. That's partly the thing about the participation in the equation, because one would question whether we were put here to be monks. And to joy from within, you certainly have that, because you have your connection with, I call it I amness, which is God. You connection with I am. You first have to be I am, and then you could be we am, which means you're in a group. But if you're only a single individual experiencing life for yourself, the ability to learn other experidigms and do other experidigms is severely, severely limited. So if you look at an example, there's a number of people here from the food industry. If you look at it like the average McDonald's employee or Walmart employee, how many experiences do they have in life? They might be lucky, to actually have positive influences in their life that show them other experidigms. But if they don't have other positive influences in life to show other experidigms, they're really stuck in a situation, Jeff.
Yeah. So I mean, my point is that one thing I've learned is that I can't give something that I don't have. So I can't extend grace to people if I haven't experienced grace.
Absolutely true. And that was my part of the workers in life that don't have any other experiences. They can't share what they don't have, but they can participate and have the desire within themselves that would be positive to go out and just experience with people. Go out and do other hobbies. Go out and join a group that plays soccer, or go out and join a group that's actually building something and are participating in a project, a society project, like going out and planting trees. And in doing that, they learn about trees. And everybody that talked about their transitions here, most of them actually went into a new situation, new experience, and grew from that. I'll be getting to the point that how many new experiences does the average person have, especially in the COVID world? But Mark, did I answer your question, or?
Yeah, you did.
So you're saying first you have to have your own I amness. You have to have your own beliefs about living and experiencing life, right?
Yeah, I think that I know. Just quick example. My wife and I went through counseling for a while. Was the best thing we ever did, and we wrote down 3 things on like an index card that we wanted from each other. And her 3 were, allow for imperfection, because I'm a perfectionist, complete tasks on time, and then have more fun. Well, 2 of those requests were grace requests. And what I realized was that if I wasn't experiencing it, if I didn't have that to give, then I couldn't give that. It was important to me to want to work on myself, to realize, to better myself, to have that to give to somebody else.
Absolutely. One of the key books I wrote was called Next, I Am Experidimer, which first you have to commit yourself to say I am, and then begin to understand who you are, not who other people define you as. Okay. And so in this equation, when I say minus the T's, turd throwers, takers, and tyrants, it's because in our society, we are bombarded by people defining you. You are this, you are that. And let's jump to that, because, and so that's the joy equation. So just keep that in your mind, and then we're going to practice it. But what I wanted to do was, because exactly what Mark said is, why don't we have I am in ourselves sometimes? And why is it so hard to get joy? And in this equation, it says minus, okay? Because there's something that takes away from your I amness, or your ability to work in groups and share experiences. There's something that takes away from that. And I'm going to jump then down to the 3 types of controlling T people. This is really important. So I say turd throwers define people, others, as you are. So I've been in innovation my whole life, and running groups of 1,000 people, 10,000 and more. And the bottom line is, especially people say, you are stupid, and the list goes on and on. Probably the most known you are person in the last 6 years was Trump. I'm not saying Trump is good or bad, but Trump used you are to control and define people. And so when they say you are, that means that you're losing your I amness, Mark. Your I amness meaning your ability to Experidigm. You're being defined by somebody else, and you've really lost your ability to Experidigm. You can't. And so with Trump saying you are Rocket Man, I mean, maybe the guy was bad, but Trump defined everybody. And when you're in a society that does that, it's more than name calling. It's defining people. So if you've been in a corporation where you get the you are, and they're putting you in your box, and then society puts you in your box. And in today's society, we're creating a lot of box, whether they're racist, sexist, or whatever. But the response, this is the problem with the negative side of the joy equation, is that most people are not trained in life to deflect or ignore the negativity. So when the turd throwers define others as you are, the response is to deflect by saying I am. But in reality, a lot of people say, so if somebody says, in high school, you are a fat girl, the girls are pretty tough on each other in high school on this issue, turd throwers. You are fat, you are ugly, you're a slut. And they should deflect by saying, I am. No, I am a soccer player. It's the things that they like to do, and focus on that. Because when one says, no, I am not that, then no means that, unfortunately, my wife, means that you actually are repeating what they said. Your mind doesn't hear no. So, and then another form of taker is, I'll just fill these in. Takers extract creativity from givers. Okay, so takers extract the creativity and resources from givers. And so what a taker does is a taker creates a problem, and you want to help that taker, and so you start helping the taker. But what the taker does is, in this problem that they created, they keep changing the milestones and what happens, so that people can be enslaved in a taker their entire life. Companies can be enslaved by takers their entire life. That they're following the problem and they're trying to solve it, but the taker keeps changing the problem, and they continue to do that. So the response is to avoid the taker problem cycle. It's a cycle, and it's very difficult to get out of a cycle if you're trapped in it. And one of the only ways to get out of that cycle is to have a colleague or participant or someone else help you realize how far entrapped you are in the cycle that you are in. So, and then the last one, and then I'll stop, is the tyrants demand you will and domesticate using their infrastructure to do that. So tyrants usually have resources, and they domesticate using resources. So, and domesticate is a key word here, because if you're not having many Experidigms, probability is you might be under the domestication of a tyrant, which is said you will. And so what is you will? I mean, there's so many ways where life is restricted by what you're allowed to do. We have the Bill of Rights in the United States, but you will take a vaccine. I mean, I'm hearing that around the clock. I mean, is that good or bad? I don't want to debate that right now, but that is a demand at this point. And the only response to that is to ignore by doing I will. I will do what I want, or we will do, not what you tell us to do. And if it's interesting, I'm using the words I am and I will, which are really important. And in fact, in the Bible, the New Testament and the Old Testament, the Christian New Testament, is that God never used the words you will. God only used I am to define myself. God used to define himself or herself, whatever, and said, I will make everything new, is one of the final things that Revelation says. I will make everything new. I am and I will. So before going into examples, I've thrown a lot out there, but the thought process is very simple. The joy equals the number of experiences that you have and the experiences with the people that participate with you, minus the T's and minus the T's is really important, because if we go through it in examples, you'll see that most people can exist in their entire life without having any positive joy. Might be having material happiness by doing some, drinking or watching a football game. But is that really joy in meeting some of their the higher levels of spiritual and joy? So I just stop there for a second, and then we can go into some examples.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that study after study with respect to longevity of life always speaks to the fact that the people that live the longest seem to be the happiest, and are also the people that, in other words, their happiness leads to longevity, but that they have a really strong support group, a lot of friends, a lot of family, and they're involved with humanity to a much greater extent, as opposed to those people that are loners or out there on their own.
Yeah, Jim, that's basically what I'm saying, and putting it in this simple form, and to take action to become a person, like you said. What this is saying is that you go experience, go do something, activity with those other people and build that relationship. But by doing, you are going to be attacked by takers and tyrants. So you have to keep building more Experidigms.
I work with a client who's a chiropractor, and part of what he does, he has a group called 100-Year Lifestyle, and I work with his newsletter, and this week's newsletter talked about tradition, and I was wondering how tradition plays into what you're talking about, because he's talking about having, at this time of year, that tradition plays so much in our life, and if you don't have tradition in your life, you're missing out. And so I was curious how tradition plays into this particular.
Well, tradition is embedded in the Experidigm itself. In other words, it's the knowledge or wisdom to actually do an activity. So, if you don't have the skill, is what Mark was saying earlier, you can't do the activity. And so since we're humans and we have the ability to store and codify and share these traditions, theoretically, they're the building blocks to go experience. Okay, so if you wanted to learn how to cook, okay, that's not passed down by genetics, that's passed down by tradition. So your Christmas dinner on how you cook, and in the process of doing the Experidigm, you meet other people. There might be 3 or 4 chefs in the room doing the Christmas dinner, and it's the tradition, but you're also learning how to do the various dishes for the meal, as an example of tradition there. Same thing in an organization, at the company, that there's traditional activities that they do to remind themselves and teach others about that Experidigm, but it also creates participation. But what stops tradition, or Experidigming, is people saying you are, you will, and people entrapping you in problems. Okay, so in a society that doesn't have tradition, how do you pass down the knowledge and skills to live? See, so in fact, is our education system around the world, are those even really knowledge and skills to live? Certainly by the time you're 18 years old in school, you haven't been taught a lot of skills. You haven't taught how to cook. You haven't taught how to finance. You haven't been taught how many activities or skills. So in America, most of our education is not tradition. Most of our education is in watching. And so it's really interesting. So how do you then become a participant? How do you meet other people? How do you connect with other people? You connect through the traditions or their knowledge that they have. Yeah, see, so this is, it really is that how many Experidigms do people have in life? And let me go through some of my, really quick, I'm going to jump to almost the bottom of this page and do an example job search, okay? Because this is, I talk at a lot of churches, okay? and a lot of organizations that have blue collar workers. Okay. Why? Because the problem is living, okay, having experiences. If you're a blue collar worker and you don't have experiences outside of the job you have no connections. So let's talk about job search bad. Let's talk about a person who's, working at McDonald's, and they work at McDonald's and they get off work and they go into a bad culture. Okay, what Experidigms do they have? Working at McDonald's is an Experidigm. Okay, at home they might not have anything. Okay, so then what participants do they have at McDonald's that are friends of theirs? 2, 3. So they got 1 times 3 minus. Now, how many bad people in their lives? Could be their parents are abusive. Could be their neighborhood's abusive. Could be abusive at school. They might have 30 to 50 to 100 negative people in their life, much more dominant. So what's the probability of them getting another job somewhere else? They have no network. Jim would call it a network. I would call it Experidigms. Let's do it another example of a 50-year-old male who's worked for 35 years at the same place. What's his Experidigms in life? He's got work, but let's just say at work, he's got 3 participants that are friends that when he leaves work, that they'll even talk to him on a social basis. And he's got church, but there's really, that's go there Sunday, come home, and he's got 3 or 4 people there that he talks with. And outside of that, he has no hobbies because work, watch, sleep kept him so busy. So he's got two Experidigms and 7 participants. That's 14. Minus, do you think he's got a lot of turd throwers at work and other places in his life? Yes. Takers and tyrants. He would be a negative maybe his entire life. So he gets fired, and there's no way for him to get another job. He's got no connections. The church connections go away. Maybe even his tithing at the church goes away, and so they go away. And the corporation goes away, and the people at the corporation are too busy. Let's talk about a good Experidigm. Let's say that person, instead of being 50 years old and only 3 people at work and no hobbies, nothing, that the person has many hobbies. Okay, RVing being a hobby, playing a sport, building something, building a garden at their house and growing their own food, and has 10 Experidigms, each with 10 people or each with 50 people. It depends on how big the group is. Well, all of a sudden, when they get fired, those groups are still there. So that person might have, 10 hobbies and 100 people and 1,000, positive thought, 1,000, positive score there, minus the number of turd throwers. Well, that person probably through his network could get a good job because maybe one of his Experidigms was golfing. And so those people help him get a job. Or one of the people at the gardening club that he goes to helps him get a job. So that's how it plays out in life. So instead of using the word networking, because networking is not necessarily a shared experience or a personal relationship with someone, it might be some other brief connection. Whereas Experidigming, you will get a job through Experidigming. So, but I wanted to stop here real quick because we're out of time. We got 5 more minutes. And Jim, I wanted to jump to the last page. I was pointing out the negative because as an innovator in large corporations, thousands of people, and I don't know if you've ever seen this in an organization where an organization tries to become more innovative and creative and enables its people to be such, just like society might want to become more innovative and creative. But embedded in society or in the corporation is many more turd throwers, takers, and tyrants than innovators and creators, okay? Because many societies are dominated by the negative side of the equation and not the positive side of this equation. So I had to say that because the times I've cried most in my life is when we've enabled thousands of people to go do amazing things and they've been shut down and punished every time they try. Okay, so society will try and punish potentially those people who go out and Experidigm. Okay, and one has to learn how to deflect them as an I am person, as a I will person, and that's what a lot of the fight is about. But before we left, I wanted to be positive. So I've written 9 books on this, and the 9 books are all how-to Experidigm. Here I introduced the, everything I've said here so far is in one book, Next I Am Experidimer. And I just wanted to show a couple visualizations in less than 2 minutes on how you can visualize your life and your Experidigms in a new way. So up here, one of the greatest breakthroughs in visualization was the subway map. This was invented not that long ago. Obviously, you have to have a subway to invent the subway map, but it contains a lot of information. And so if you can do this in your life, you will actually see how Experidigms work with each other. So you might have a hobby of working on cars, but it actually might help you build other things. And so what this does is these are Experidigm routes, are obviously subway routes. There's the yellow one called Eat. And on that, there's a whole thing on how you grow your food, how you prepare your food, how you eat your food, how you cook your food. There's about 50 Experidigms on that subway ride, okay? And this is what you would have in life. The health, there's the same thing. How do you get healthy? Well, you eat. So there's going to be a connection with, could be a connection with eating and riding the health subway line. So I would suggest that you put out some of the major Experidigms in your life: health, travel, leisure, eat, learn, work, and see how the activities that you're doing in them can lead to more activities, more things, okay? Because in our world of, what would you call it? Health today, we grow our own food. I grow my own food. I prepare most of my own food. I can't eat out at a restaurant. They have oils that give me a heart attack. I need to eat my own food. When I do that, I share it with others. We have 50 beehives in over 10 locations in Atlanta. Why? We teach people how to raise bees and eat honey. Why honey and why propolis? It's health. It's not food, it's health. But it's doing, and in learning that, I probably have 300 or 400 friends that are in the bee community that all do other Experidigms that come together. So you can visualize this, and your life can become an Experidigm of subway maps, and you can share this with your friends. Now, in other organizations you're in, Experidigm is built of action strips. So in this picture here, the little circle there, smiling in nature, is an Experidigm. I want to go to nature. But what can I do in nature? Just a simple answer. Nature might have 1,000 Experidigms that I can get involved with other people. The first one over here is turn over rocks. That's the first vertical to the right of the smiling in nature. Turn over rocks. Why would I turn over a rock? There's about 1,000 different insects and critters underneath that rock. And I can learn about every one of those and share those with other people. I can walk at dusk. Specific Experidigm. Why at dusk? Because in a forest or in nature, a significant portion of the wildlife comes out at dusk. That's when it hunts. That's when it lives. That's when many things go out and eat. That's when they hunt. You will see an active, and you can write this down, and you could go walking. Has anybody here ever walked in a forest? I'm assuming yes. Everybody's walked in a forest. Have you walked at night when it's completely dark at 10 p.m.?
Nope.
This is an interesting thought. So I would suggest take a couple friends with you and walk into the forest without a flashlight. And you will find that your eyes immediately adjust. You can see everything. If you took a flashlight with you, you could not see anything. And so you walk through the forest, you will see all the animals. You will see their eyes. You will see them running. You will actually see the forest alive at midnight from the shining of the moon. Now, if it's raining out there, it'll be a little different, but you're using different senses because you'll see the rain falling off the animals. I could go further that there's many more on just the smiling in nature Experidigm to go out there and share that with other people. And lastly, what I would say, I call it umbrella Experidigm management. You saw the subway version. When you look at this, if all your Experidigms have these activities with it, in each of these activities, you build relationships with other people that are experts, okay? Then you're going to have many Experidigms, and it sounds like a lot to do and a lot to manage, but it's not really, because these are shared with other Experidigms. My slow walk in the woods, which is the third one right there. Why do I slow walk in the woods? I'm looking for chanterelle mushrooms so I can take those home and eat them. And so because of that Experidigm, I have a cooking Experidigm with other people that do that, just that specific activity, cooking with chanterelles. So I have a whole Experidigm of cooking mushrooms. And I don't do that Experidigm all the time, but under my umbrella of Experidigms, I have shared activities that makes all my Experidigms that I do. My last point is more of a cautionary tale. The only thing I'm going to say about page 2 is at the top of page 2, I said, who claims human experience as a raw material free for the taking and can ignore considerations of individual rights? So who claims human experience as a raw material free for the taking and can ignore considerations of individual rights? Who do you think?
Me.
Karl Marx.
Well, it's probably not far off. No, I mean, well, who do you think sells experiences today and profits from them? Well, not just sells them, takes them from other people and sells them.
Oh, Facebook.
Social
Facebook.
media. Social
Yeah.
media.
Google, when there's a book called Surveillance Capitalism. Google, in their original 10 declarations, is that we have the right to take people's Experidigms, and since we own those Experidigms, they use the word experiences, we can sell them. And then what happens and what's happening because of these kind of thoughts is that bigness can sell Experidigms, and there's very few Experidigms left except those that bigness can sell. So this really gets to the question of tradition that was asked. Tradition isn't running our ability to share Experidigms. Bigness is creating the few Experidigms that we can have, which is making what I'm talking about very difficult to do. Because who can you go talk to about doing some of these Experidigms except going to buy them from some big corporation or a big government? And in fact, government Marxism does restrict Experidigms, restrict experiences. So the scary thing is, this is why I wanted to mention it today, although I taught companies how to do Experidigms, the reality is that it's getting harder and harder to be free enough to Experidigm. In other words, freedom of speech is in the Bill of Rights. The 10 Bill of Rights gives an individual, quote, some freedoms. Corporations have those same 10 Bill of Rights by the courts and by the U.S. Commercial Code. So they act just as an individual for their own necessarily means. So the reality of today's world is that if Experidigming is very difficult to do, and having then the participants that come from those Experidigms are harder to do, one goes out and buys something and consumes it themselves, joy equation is hard to fulfill at this point, getting harder and harder to fulfill. So Mark, getting back to your original point of I am, yes, I amness is important, but our ability to learn and understand about what experiences we could have in life normally comes from our relationships and the experiences and the activities that we do, not from buying them. And therein lies the rub. I hope I've given you guys a lot to think about. This simple equation is extremely powerful if it really applies to your group, to the society, because if you can't experience, joy's going to be hard to come by. And, you know, I guess a totalitarian regime would be the place where no experience happens because you can only do what the tyrant wants. But So I would say freedom is not just the 10 Bill of Rights. I would say freedom is the ability to go do your activities and to experience those activities with other people. The first Bill of Rights, number one, was the right to assemble. We don't have that right to assemble anymore. Now I'm disappointed because I was building football field sized places, or when a shopping mall shuts down, to go in and put thousands of Experidigms inside that mall where people could come and learn about it. You can't do that today. You won't be able to congregate with a lot of people to go do an Experidigm. Is that scary?
Mark, you're talking because of the COVID, the mask mandates, and all those government enforced kind of mandates.
That's part of it, Jim. But the reality is that the ability to go and meet with another person on a skill, and I'm really talking about the 90% of people that don't have the economic ability to buy their Experidigms or buy into a membered group or something like that. So, we have built a society that to join another group costs money. Okay. And to get into that, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but the ability from COVID locking out people, from the average person to go and learn a craft might cost them a lot of money. So society is not set up for us to learn experiences, learn skills. School that teaches you so few subjects as opposed to skills, that we really are in a situation where we've come to, most of my friends, their average Experidigm is to go watch the football game and drink beer after they've worked all week. And so they come home and watch TV, and if a football games are on, they can watch all 3 days of the weekend, and I'm not saying that's good or bad. I would say that their experiences in life are very, very limited.
I just want to give a quick example. Years and years ago, when I was much younger, I was unemployed for a short period of time, and I had to go to the unemployment office, and part of the requirement was I had to sit through a little course on how to get a job and how to prepare a resume. And I don't even know if they do that type of stuff anymore, but I was in the room with about 12 people, and the lady went around and she said, no matter what you did, you have other experiences that you can use as to get a new job. And she was trying to explain that to everybody. And she said, for example, if you're a lathe worker and you work that lathe, and you're probably in charge of making sure the materials you need are there. So you're in charge of an inventory system. Maybe you do this and you do that. Those are other skills that you have. So she goes around the room and she wanted people to give examples of what they did. You get to this guy, and I was dumbfounded. Everybody was giving little examples of different jobs that they could do besides what they were actually hired to do and what experiences they had. And they get to this guy and he goes, I'm a lathe worker. He had nothing to say. He had no other experiences that he could rely on to get a job. In his mind, that's all he could do. And even though she gave him plenty of examples, he just wasn't grasping that in his head, that he's much more skilled than he realized. And it was just kind of sad to see that an individual puts themselves into that position.
I got to tell you, Ken, very perceptive is when I go and do this at churches and I'm with people that are 35 to 50 years old and talk this way about the joy equation and how to go beyond networking and do Experidigms and that you love. People start crying because they realize for the first time in their life how limited of a life they led. They did the work, watch, sleep cycle, and they didn't have any other things in their life. And because of that when a transition is in front of you, it's very difficult to do it. And that's when people start fearing change, fearing transitions, and fear of that is just ridiculous. But it's inbred in us by the things that the territories, takers, and tyrants that create the fear that you can't transition and you can't change. and you get stuck. And so when you see these older people crying because they bought the hook, line, and sinker that the corporation is going to take care of them or the church was going to take care of them, and wow, you got to give them new skills with which to Experidigm life. And many of our societal ills are this way. So
Ken, to sort of piggyback on that point of yours, I see that every day where job seekers, will come to me, looking for help or whatever. They totally underpresent or represent themselves by not, expressing the full dimensions of their skill set or skill stack. And what's interesting today about jobs, I mean, so many people are looking for people with unique experiences and backgrounds, sort of seemingly unrelated experiences and skills that they can bring together that would be a good fit for the particular needs of, their company. One good example is foreign language skills. So many people I talk to really don't give that enough value, in their resume or their bio. And yet, more and more companies are looking to attract totally different markets for their products or employee base or whatever. And that's just one example. I often speak about Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, talking about the importance of having a varied skill set, or he calls it a skill stack, that you can position yourself in a unique and more competitive way by putting different skills and experiences together to, either solve problems, start a new business, or, take on a new job responsibility. So I think to your point, I mean, that's really undervalued out there in the society.
Jim, do what you were saying with Scott Adams. He's a leading advocate of like Experidigm, because he was against setting goals in life and things like that, because that led to disappointment and transition issues and everything else. I don't know if you've ever read one of his books about that, right? Have you ever done that? Or?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of his quotes I like the best is, forget about goals. It's about having systems. So people might have goals in place, but they don't have the system in place to achieve those goals. Sure. Any other questions or thought for Mark?
Yeah, if I could chime in, I mean, a great presentation, Mark. A couple of things come to mind for me when we're talking about happiness. One distinction I have around there is that happiness is connected to what's happening right now versus joy, right? Yeah. And a lot of times that's why people find it fleeting. But I want to go to another perspective around joy. When you think about children, and this is around this thing called the attachment theory, right? So from birth to 5, a child doesn't learn anger, resentment, hostility, or frustration, or violence by reading about it in a book. The child can't read. Right. The limbic system of the brain, the base brain, learns from immersion, right? And so when the child is born, coming into the emotional health of the dynamics of their early caregivers. And obviously all of us are born to imperfect parents, but what can happen in this structure where the child cannot fully attach, securely attach, is they develop a childhood survival adaptive routine to make an adjustment because they can't do what they're naturally formed to do. And so that's childhood survival adaptive routine. It works well at age 5, age 8, age 10 or 12. But now some of those controlling tendencies, pleasing tendencies, or protecting tendencies at age 35, 45, 50 are still operating and can create a suboptimal solution in your life from that standpoint. And a lot of times what people don't recognize is the power of that base brain and always wanting to heal itself. So what I see happening a lot of times in relationships, and you'll wonder why, well, this woman may have seen her mother abused by someone in a domestic violence situation, and then they go out there and they marry somebody who's an abuser, or they may have grown up in an alcoholic family. They go out there and marry somebody who's an alcoholic. So that base brain has the power, with unless you've done work and healing work, to take you back into a relationship that's similar to your family of origin in order for it to heal itself. And so a lot of times why I think sometimes we don't experience joy, and why we have so much, as we see out here trying to elix our pain through drugs or alcohol or shopping or gambling or pornography or something else, is because we really didn't have that joy developed in us to start with. And this is why, I spent, time working over at Talbot Recovery for a year, doing work with men there. And a lot of times you have a lot of young adults who don't get it, at the average, I think 95% of people who get addicted, it happens before their 25th birthday. And what folks don't understand is the children are actually the symptom bearers of the dysfunction within the family system. And so, when you think about that from a joy perspective, how much credence do you give to, what's the environment, the emotional health of the environment of your early stage, in terms of what's going on with your parents, in terms of creating a structure where you bring joy with you from inside out versus looking at it from an external standpoint, from a happiness perspective.
I 100% agree with you, 100%. And it does start with I am, but that gets messed up. But like you were saying, one of the only ways to escape is to go do another Experidigm. So, a lot of people getting out of a poor environment go play sports. They involve themselves in work and work around the clock, and they escape their maybe immediate problem, their immediate throwers and takers, but they stop. See, so what happens is you have to continue to Experidigm, continue to transition, and add a group of Experidigms to you, otherwise you can get stuck. Like you said, that's why I said the joy equation for a child. You can get stuck from the age of 4 for the rest of your life. And it's scary. And for me, the only way to escape from that is to go Experidigm, because you're going to attract other participants who are going to lead you to other Experidigms that get you out of the situation. And that's it. So, when I talk to people, all that I've written is about the 80 or 90% who live paycheck to paycheck, hate their jobs, and have little access to the material successes that others have. That's 80 to 90% of Americans. And so the reality is, how do you get to those new Experidigms? And you need other participants to take you, grab you by the hand, okay? And especially when you're young.
Mark, I can say that I really, really appreciate this discussion, because it's really helping me frame in my own mind about being more proactive regarding finding the things that you're talking about, particularly joy. And I recently became a grandfather, and I didn't know my son-in-law's parents. And I got to meet them through my grandson. And his parents, his mother is a sailor, and she invited me to go sailing with her.
Oh, yeah.
And I had all these takers and these others saying, Harold, do you really want to go sailing? Do you really want to get out on that water? Do you really, and all that? But when I went there, it was probably one of my beautiful experience. Being in Chicago, on the lake, in the water, experiencing the wind, looking at Chicago from a whole different point of view.
From the water. I've done it. It's unbelievable. Yeah, everybody should do it, right?
And so, this whole sense of being and experience another person, then learning about sailing, which I know absolutely nothing about. The front end of a boat versus the back end of a boat, and just understanding the different terms, and then the people. And it just brought a whole new element, even connecting me with another potential client who also enjoys sailing. And so that whole sense of another experience in life, in your talk today, just teaches me to seek more of that.
Yes.
Seek more of that and be more proactive about it. So I appreciate your talk very much.
I appreciate
was-
it. I'd love to
If
talk
I
more
could
about
on
it
that,
with you.
there was a guy who did a presentation long ago about this whole notion of stress. I'm talking about stress management. The headline was, he was talking about the distinction between human doing and human being. And what he said was the average corporate executive gets a 1-year return for a 25-year investment in corporate America.
I would probably agree with that.
A
Yeah.
1-year human
Yeah.
being, human being return versus 25 years of human doing.
Yeah, that's.
But you
yeah.
got a lot of executives out there. I had to get to a director in McDonald's before one of my bosses challenged me. Why can't you take off 2 weeks in a row? I'm going to speak at one of my best brother's funerals this weekend. And going back to your point, you know, sometimes I say, Mark, the most dangerous times in a man's life is the 2 years after retirement, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you may be familiar. There's a great book out there by Bob Burford. I've given it to a lot of people. It's called Halftime: How to
Yep.
Transition from Success to Significance. Because you have a lot of men out there who was in that hard grind, just like I was. But if your identity is in that business card, when that business card goes, now you're going to have a lot of challenges in your married life and in other aspects of life, dealing with making a significant transition, regardless of how much money you have.
Absolutely. That's why I want to get the Experidigm in front of the 80%, especially when they're young in their careers, and they could have a career like those on this call who were actually became successful at doing Experidigms and transitions. But the generation to pass that tradition on is the real problem today, because many traditions are not being passed on because the T's want to control what experiences we have. And so, you know, what are in other words for T's? Racists, sexists, bigots, okay? They all want to keep control. And I mean, it's racist, sexist, bigots, those type of T's, there's thousands of those kinds of T's. And if we're not taught how to deflect them and go have I am versus you are, or I will versus you will, this is where freedom is lost. It's lost in the spiritual battle of experiencing life together in fellowship, together with other people.
I think you've done a great job with this material today, Mark, and looking forward to getting it edited on the YouTube channel so more and more people can see it, especially those that missed it today.
Well, Jim, thanks. I thank the opportunity, and thanks for the discussion at the end.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate your attendance today. I know it's tough to get people together, even virtually during the holiday season, but I really appreciate the attendance. If I don't talk to you all again before Christmas, I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. Then we're on to the new year, and hopefully that will be even better than 2021 was.